These rare book moments, we try and do some basic things about collecting, give some ideas, some hints, a little bit about collecting itself. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some maps. And the maps have to do with railroads. There is no more iconic figure of the industrial age than the steam locomotive as it ran across whatever country or place it was. We still have strong images of those steam locomotives running across the country. It happens that earlier this month, an interesting thing came into the store here. This is a plan for the Newcastle and Carlisle Railway, which was in northern England, just south of Scotland. It ran across from the east coast to the west. This particular map was evidently a promotional tool. It is done in order to show a proposed railroad, and it was done in order to have some of the landlords get on board with all of this. This map is from 1825, and it is probably the earliest railroad map in private hands. Interestingly enough, it wasn't until 1831 that the railroad could get all of the pieces in place in order to start construction, and it wasn't until a few years later that it actually went into operation. Initially, it was made for commerce. It carried coal to the port city and that kind of thing. Eventually, it became, of course, important to carry people from place to place. This particular map it's an engraving, hand-colored. It unrolls to about 9 feet long, of all things. It just keeps going and going and going. But it's a proposed railroad. But people got on board very quickly. And by 1835, there were already railroad timetables. And one of the earliest was Bradshaw. And Bradshaw, this is the earliest national map of railroads. It includes also, along in here, some of the proposed railroads again. Bradshaw's became very important and very famous within just a couple of years. It became a monthly and stayed in business until the late 20th century. In this particular thing, it has all of these little maps, but it also has timetables so that you know when to get on board, that sort of thing. One of the interesting things is that Phineas Fogg, as he was going around the world in 80 days, he used Bradshaw's to at least get started. And so that's an important map as well, and includes a lot of proposed railroads of all things. Jumping across the Atlantic, we have the Mitchell's Traveler's Guide. Mitchell was known for its very accurate maps early on in our country. One of the interesting things I find here is that there are red lines and blue lines. The red lines were for waterways, canals that were used, and then the blue lines are the railroads. And you can see that there are virtually no blue lines beyond the Alleghenies. This is from about 1845, and interestingly enough, although Mitchell was particularly accurate in the presentation of his maps, it happens that some of these railroads did not exist at this time. So or at least parts of them. So it too has some proposed railroads involved. And I find that kind of interesting. Jumping all the way up into the 1880s, here in Florida, one of the last frontiers, we have a whole slew of proposed railroads running throughout the state. You can see that there is no Florida East Coast Railroad in 1880 when this is from, and there is no Tampa Bay Hotel or plant system, I should say, on the other coast. Most of these railroads were proposed and eventually purchased by one or the other of the Henrys. You can also see how important it was for the railroads to hook up with ships. Up until this point, the primary way of getting around in Florida was to go from port to port rather than from railroad station to railroad station. One of the underlining themes here is, here are 4 things that came into the store in the last month or so. And don't you know that all of a sudden we have the makings for another little collection of sorts. And that's one of the things to look for as you make your collection. There may be items that come together that you had no idea ever would. There may be collections, important collections, that you can put together that you really had no design to do. Collections are organic, and they sort of grow on their own. This is a prime example. Here we have 4 disparate things that come into the store, and all of a sudden we have a minor collection. I don't know if we'll continue with this, but it's awfully fun to speculate about it, and I hope you have a lot of fun too.